From 95.7 The Spin, it's the Screaming Eagles Sports Podcast. Your rundown of everything USI Athletics. Interviews with coaches and players, game recaps, and much more. And it starts right now.
It's time for the Screaming Eagles Sports Podcast. Today, a very special guest, GLVC Commissioner Jim Naumovich.
He is coming into the show. Got to talk to him for a little bit earlier. Went through the email, kind of talked a little bit. He seems very excited to be joining the show, just with a couple kids from USI.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
it's an exciting thing being able to talk to the commissioner of the Great Lakes Valley Conference, home for USI Athletics, and really giving us a job for our first year of college. So it's really nice to be able to talk a little bit about the basketball season, spring sports, and really hoping to get some answers from him today.
Absolutely. Spring sports, fall sports, basketball, a lot to discuss. So we're going to head on over. We've got him waiting in the Zoom call. We're ready to go. And it's time for the Screaming Eagles Sports Podcast. Thank
you, Jim Naumovich, for coming into the show, the Screaming Eagles Sports Podcast, starting right away. It's really a pleasure to be able to talk to you, and we want to thank you for taking just a little bit of your time out of your day just to answer some questions we might have about this upcoming season for the GLVC.
Nathaniel, Christian, it's my pleasure to be here and talk a little bit about GLVC and USI basketball.
The first question I have, well, just to clarify, the GLVC did come up with a schedule. It's an all-conference schedule for basketball. A question that I personally have is, what will happen if a game gets canceled?
So we have a makeup policy that in our conference handbook that we'll comply with. We will try to make up games, so it will be it'll be a combination of the coaches and myself to come up with a date if possible. Now we also have a conference policy that states once a school makes a trip to another site. So for instance, if Lindenwood comes to Southern Indiana, and for some reason that game doesn't get played, technically Lindenwood wouldn't be required to make a return trip to USI. Now they could say, yeah, but we'll go anyhow, and then we would try to find a date. So right now we'll still try to find a date for games that are canceled, but obviously that's going to become more of a challenge as we get into the season to find out, especially with where the teams are, how far away they are from each other, whether that's going to be doable or not.
Absolutely. And obviously it is an all-conference schedule. Can you just kind of talk about what the decision-making process was going into making the non-conference or the full conference schedule and no non-conference games?
Yeah, good question, Christian. So I would think probably the top priority for us was that by playing only GLVC schools, we are familiar with what their COVID testing policies and protocols will be, because everybody in the conference is going to have to comply with that. So we know what to expect from testing and screening and sanitizing and disinfecting facilities and what, where we're going to be at with spectators if there are spectators. And so, playing within the conference, we have a better comfort for teams on the road about what they can expect when they get to those home schools. So yeah, we are playing a 22-game conference-only schedule for 2020-21.
And whenever you look through the schedule, you notice that there are quote-unquote bye weeks or just bye games for each school. Each school, I think it's 2 if I'm not correct. Could you talk a little bit about the decision of having a quote-unquote bye week?
Well, it's got a lot to do with the mathematical logarithms that go into putting the schedule together, and that the other thing is that trying to provide everybody with an equal balance of 11 home, 11 away games, and then trying to keep the number of consecutive away games to a workable number. And so it's kind of a convoluted answer, but it's a convoluted question. So there are a lot of variables to go into why we have bye weeks, and those are some of them.
Earlier you mentioned that all of the schools in the conference are following testing protocols, things like that. Can you elaborate on what those protocols will be for the upcoming season?
So so we are working with the U.S. Council on Athletes' Health, and we also looking at the NCAA and the Sports Science Institute. We're referencing information that's been provided for member schools, but we're also we have our own testing protocol that we're putting in place for the participating teams, for the officials that are working the game. We have another screening protocol for the scorers table personnel that essential personnel that have to be on site. So we actually are in this week, so I'm not really at liberty to share anything more until everything is official. And our Council of Presidents met on Monday, and they meet again Friday morning. And at that point, we hope to have everything wrapped up and tied together for the upcoming season.
And there could be a situation where a player has COVID during a competition but didn't know it. What happens if a player tests positive for COVID during competition?
Well, we have, we would follow the institution's contact tracing program, because everybody in the school, everybody in the league has a contact tracing protocol. So that's going to be largely dependent on what the institution's policy says and what their local and state health officials are saying in terms of who would need to be quarantined, who needs to be isolated, 10 days, 14 days. The biggest part of that is if it's during a contest where they in close contact with an opponent or with a teammate for 15 minutes. So that's where the contact tracing comes into play, and it's why those individuals are specifically trained, because they have specific indicators that they'll look at in film or in the video to determine who needs to be quarantined in order to mitigate the spread. And obviously we hope that doesn't happen, but if it does happen, our first priority is to make sure that the student athletes are well taken care of, and our athletic trainers have done a phenomenal job of trying to help us build out policies and procedures to address that circumstance in hopes that it never happens.
One thing that I've noticed, in particular with high school sports, we've seen a lot of aspects where it's been teams have had to wear masks while sitting on the bench, officials have had to wear masks. Is that something you expect to happen during GLVC play?
Yeah, we anticipate that student athletes on the bench will be masked. Officials, we are not requiring officials to be masked during the game. They will be required to be masked when they come into the facility, as soon as at the end of the quarter for women's basketball or at the end of the half for men's basketball, that they're masked when they go back to their locker room. So they'll be masked at all times in the facility except for the game. Now, if an official opts to masks, they can do that, but we're not requiring them to do so. We will also the folks at the scorers table will be required to be masked, and we'll try to socially distance them to the extent we can. But obviously, you've got scoreboards and timers and video boards that are connected electronically, so we'll have to do our best to separate them, but you're somewhat limited because of the equipment that they need to have access to.
And along with masks, it's just another way to keep players safe during competition. What other protocols are you enforcing to try and keep the players safe during competition?
How they're situated on the team bench. So we will, there's some flexibility that's been given there in terms of separating the benches or the chairs that the teams are sitting on. If we are using the same locker rooms, they're to be disinfected and sanitized. We'll have multiple game balls that we'll use during the course of a game. And when a ball does come out of play, it'll be required to be wiped down and sanitized. So normally there's one game ball that we use. So that'll be a change. Part of our plan is once we have approval of our GLVC basketball pillars, I'll have a Zoom meeting with our women's and our men's basketball coaches, because there are some changes this year about what they can and can't do with team practices and when they can access the facility. So we'll cover everything with them, and then we'll have a similar meeting with all of our contest administrators and game operations staffs at all of our schools. So they're aware of provisions that they're going to need to take to make sure that everything is good to go when visiting teams and officials get to their place as well.
Something we've already seen here at USI is a team having to go into quarantine. The men's basketball team came into close contact or had a positive test or something like that. I guess the question would be, if one player gets it on the team, does everyone go into quarantine, or just a few of the players, or how exactly would that process work?
That's a great question, and that's been a topic for a couple of meetings. So I have a weekly meeting with our athletic directors, and it's 98% COVID related. So where we are at right now is in that scenario, it would be up to the institution's contact tracing protocol to make that determination of who else would need to be quarantined. Would anybody on the opposing team need to be quarantined? So that's going to be those will be some significant decisions that are made, but we're going to have to rely on our institutions and the individuals that they've got tracing to help us with that.
I know a lot of sports, specifically football, they have a minimum number of players required to participate in a competition. Will you be enforcing a minimum number of players during any sort of competition this basketball season?
We don't have any minimum number stated as of right now. So to answer your question, no, but we 5 would be, we would take the floor with 5. The other question, or the other part of that is, officiating, because the officials, so you can't start a game with one official and you can't end a game with one official. Normally it's a 3-person crew, but we are also expecting that there may be times where we have only a that's able to officiate the game. So the officials have been, and the mechanics are different, and the placement on the floor is different when it's a 2-person crew versus 3. So, But to answer your question, Nathaniel, we don't have a minimum number of student athletes. So that would be an institutional decision. If they're down where they don't feel like they can provide, a team, a sufficient number of players to get them through a game, then they would have to postpone.
One thing about the GLVC is obviously there's a lot of different schools in a couple of different states. So in particular, Illinois has passed some legislation to kind of limit how things are going to go as far as athletics and stuff like that. How is that going to work out with some of your schools in Illinois with the way that their government is doing things over there?
Yeah, Christian, so it's my understanding that a lot of the restrictions that have been put in place by the state of Illinois are applicable for K through 12, so grade schools and high schools, and they don't right now apply to institutions of higher learning. So for Lewis, Quincy, Illinois Springfield, and McKendree, they are not being held to some of those restrictions as the high schools are. So, knock on wood, that doesn't happen. It could, but right now that's not the case. So we anticipate that they would be able to move forward with competition on November the 27th.
Something that all of us are curious about at the radio station is being allowed into a basketball competition, a basketball game. As of now, who is allowed in during competition? Media, any fans? How is that working out as of now?
So that will be part of our GLVC basketball pillars, and that's what the Council of Presidents will be discussing and voting on Friday the 6th. Right? Yeah, tomorrow, Friday, November 6th. So, because I don't have an answer for you with that, because it hasn't been finalized yet. But clearly, we've been talking about spectators and parents and visiting teams and an official travel party and visiting media. If we're in a position where we aren't able to have spectators, then I know the athletic directors felt very strongly on the call on Wednesday that we provide an opportunity for visiting media to be present so that the games can somehow be conveyed back to parents, families, students, alumni, season ticket holders, boosters, things of that nature. So I would anticipate that wherever we come out with on who's going to be allowed into the facility, I have a very good feeling that visiting media will be a part of that group.
And one thing, obviously, that changes is it's going to be a lot more expensive this year to have your basketball season due to COVID testing and things like that. How big of an issue is that for you guys, and just kind of some of the expenses that you wouldn't typically have? Just kind of elaborate on those.
Wow, that's that's the $64,000 question is the testing piece to this. And so it's not just the testing, it's all the, PPE, to make sure that everybody masks and having access to sanitizers and disinfectants and having people that can do all that and the contact tracing. And it's a significant expense. Now, some of the schools will realize some savings in their budgets because we're only playing 22 conference games as opposed to 26. So they may be saving some money on charter buses and hotels and meals because we aren't playing as many games. But I don't want to mislead anybody to think that those savings alone will cover the cost of weekly testing of student athletes because of officials. We have to, take care of the officials as well. So it is going to be, it's going to be significant. And, it's a financial challenge for our athletic directors and our presidents and chancellors as well.
And then something that the GLVC does a little differently for basketball is the point system. Averages out each game depending on whether you're at home facing an above 500 team, so on, so forth. With the complications of this season, will the point system stick, especially if a team has to cancel one of their games?
Yeah, we're gonna continue with the point rating system, Nathaniel. Off the top of my head, I think this is the 4th year that we've had that. So we discussed that we had Zoom meetings with our men's basketball coaches and our women's basketball coaches a couple months ago, and both groups wanted to maintain the point rating system. And in fact, if we have game cancellations, we still feel that that's probably the fairest way to determine the top 8 teams to qualify for the conference tournament in the event that we would have some games that get canceled and aren't able to be made up.
And you mentioned the conference tournament. Obviously, that's still months away. But are there any changes expected as far as like location, or are the women going to play in a certain place, the men in a different place, just to try to limit all of that traffic? Or like, is there any kind of update on the conference tournament?
Right. So right now, as of when we're talking here on November the 5th, we are still planning to host the tournament at First Community Arena on the campus of Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. I had a call with some of their administrators a couple weeks ago, and they have some capacity limits that probably are going to make it necessary for us to go to our plan B. And if we're not able to have spectators at the conference tournament and we don't have ticket revenue to help subsidize the cost of the event, then our plan B would be to go to campus sites. So, and the tournament format would change a little bit. So instead of being Thursday through Sunday, the tournament would likely start on a Tuesday, and the number 1, 2, 3, and 4 seeds on the women's side and the 1, 2, 3, 4 seeds on the men's side would host those quarterfinal games on campus on a Tuesday. And then the highest remaining seed from those quarterfinal games would host the semifinals and finals the following Saturday and Sunday. So you could have both genders together. So for instance, if USI, with Rick and Stan's teams, if they were the highest remaining seeds after the quarterfinal round, they could conceivably host both genders on that Friday and Saturday. But it's also probably more likely that the women's semifinals and finals would take place at one school and a men's semifinals and finals at another.
It really seems like all of the committee has really made some great decisions this season, and it really seems like you guys are on top of things. But what are some of the problems you could see during the postseason that might just come up out of nowhere?
Well, things just change on a daily basis. So you have to be flexible and be ready to pivot. I know we've had some athletic directors who wonder about if we don't get the spread contained, and we keep, and teams have to go in quarantine, being able to put together the schedule and being able to play it as is. I think one of the ongoing challenges to answer your question is we might have to be creating multiple new schedules as the season progresses based on the number of teams that are competing and how long they're going to be out. So we're prepared to do that. We got a great scheduling consultant that we work with, and he's been he stands ready. So that's probably would be the most significant challenges if we get to the point where the schedule that we've approved needs to continually be updated and modified because we don't have the same number of schools that are able to, put teams on the floor on a weekly basis. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Let's hope that we can get beyond this soon.
And obviously basketball right now at the forefront of everybody's mind, but kind of moving forward into some of the other sports. Obviously, a majority of the fall sports were pushed back into the spring. Kind of what went into that decision as far as going conference only and then no NCAA championships in the fall season coming up in the spring?
Yeah, so Christian, that was a real desire on the part of everybody associated with the conference. So the presidents, the chancellors, the ADs, our faculty athletic reps, our senior women's administrators, that even without NCAA fall championships, we wanted to be able to provide some meaningful competition opportunities for our football, soccer, and volleyball student athletes because, we had to cancel their fall season. Well, we were able to put on a cross-country championship, and we gave our cross-country runners a couple other events that they could compete in. So we felt good about that. We were one of only 6 Division II leagues that hosted cross-country during the fall. And by moving soccer, volleyball, and football to the spring, we know that's going to present some significant staffing and facility challenges for our member schools. But our athletic directors, faculty athletic reps, and senior women's administrators were willing to take on those challenges to provide those student athletes that opportunity to compete. So again, the schedules have had to be truncated somewhat. They're not going to have access to NCAA championships, but we certainly want to provide them some sort of competition for a regular season and then have a conference tournament to end their year.
What are going to be some of the differences managing spring sports to basketball? What's going to be the big difference there?
Well, I think at the campus level, it's just, the facility usage. So while you've got basketball going on, normally you wouldn't have to concern yourself with having volleyball competition also taking place. And that's going to be the reality for a school like USI. If you're a school like Lewis or Kendry or Quincy, you not only have women's volleyball going on, you have men's volleyball going on top of men's and women's basketball. So it's going to take quite a bit of juggling, to get not only competition, but those teams have to have places to practice as well. And you still have to go through all the mitigation efforts to prevent the spread. So there's a lot of logistical challenges to that. And then, from a conference championship perspective, the month of April will be slammed with what would normally be our spring championships, as well as the fall sports all concluding their season with their own conference championships.
And you mentioned the spring sports. Are all traditional spring sports slated to start on time, or do you anticipate them having a later start to this upcoming season?
No, we at this point, we're anticipating that their seasons will start as scheduled. And again, just as a reminder, the spring sports were the ones that really got impacted in spring of 2020. We were second week of March, so we had a handful of baseball games in and a handful of softball games in, and probably not much with tennis or golf or outdoor track before their seasons were ended. So we're trying our best to give them as much of a complete season as we can, since they really got shortchanged last year.
And it's a long time until spring sports really get going, February, around that area, volleyball start. But do you hope to have regular media personnel, athletic personnel allowed to be in competition for spring sports?
That's the plan. So I mentioned this GLVC basketball pillars document that we built out, and that's our policies and procedures for the sport of basketball. We'll continue to build those out for every sport, and so that will address questions like media access and practice availability, and when visiting teams can get to the site and things of that nature. But I would anticipate that visiting media will be a big part of our discussions moving forward for the spring sports.
And in your opinion, does everything point to a successful basketball season, spring season, everything like that?
I don't know if everything points that way, Christian, but we have to be optimistic, and we have we have an obligation to our student athletes to put forth our best efforts to give them that opportunity to compete. It's already going to be a different environment for them this year, so we're going to do everything we can to make this happen, and a lot of people on each campus are committed to doing that. So we have to remain optimistic and in hopes that sports provides us some a respite from some of the other challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis, whether it's COVID or natural disasters or our political system or whatever. We need those contests to kind of help balance ourselves.
And I think that's all the questions we have. I want to thank you once again for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be able to talk to just a couple college kids.
Yeah, you're the future, man. Absolutely, I'm going to talk to a couple college kids.
We really appreciate
I think it's great that you guys are doing this. Congratulations. You should be commended for taking the initiative and providing information to your fellow students at USI and all the Screaming Eagle fans. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We'll keep in touch. Thank you again for joining the show.
Please do. Be happy to speak with you guys again. Take care.
Thank you again.
You too. Screaming Eagles Sports Podcast, Christian Rigg, Nathaniel Barbie. That was our sit down with GLVC Commissioner Jim Naumovich. I believe we're pronouncing that right. And really want to once again thank him for taking the time to sit down with us and discuss basketball and all the spring sports and everything like that.
Just to clarify everything you said in a very short summary, looking very hopeful for the basketball season. Fans to begin, no, there's none of them. But as you said, the committee is looking to get past that, trying to get fans and all media, that's us, into the games. And that's some news I couldn't stop smiling about.
Oh, yeah, the visiting media, that's certainly been a question at the forefront of everybody's mind, has been if visiting media, such as ourselves, will be allowed to go to away games. And the way he made it look, it sounds like that's going to be a great possibility for us here at USI. So definitely looking forward to that. It's a big answer to one of our big questions.
And that will be released Friday, November 6th. As you said, the committee is going to sit down and get a finalized answer. Hopefully, we'll release it on our social media, Twitter, Facebook, everything we possibly have to give information to all of our fans, of course.
And if you don't follow us on Twitter, that's at The Spin Sports. And then on Facebook, just go in your search bar, type 95.7 The Spin Sports, and give us a like over there. Make sure to stay in contact with us. We are always reading everything that's tweeted at us, everything that is interacted with. We really appreciate the support from a lot of the fans that we get, and a lot of the student athletes do a really good job as well here at USI. So we want to really thank them. And once again, want to thank Jim Naumovich for taking the time to sit down with us.
It was a great one.
Absolutely was. With that, I think we're ready to sign off on the Screaming Eagles Sports Podcast. I'm Christian.
I'm Daniel.
And you've been listening to the Screaming Eagles Sports Podcast.